Hey, here's my latest sawblade and firewood knife. It's a hook knife for carving things like bowls and spoons. And in this build, I challenged myself to use only hand tools for shaping this handle. I'm going to take you through the entire knife making process, so let's hack and build. I started with a small chunk of firewood for the handle, and then split the piece down using methods similar to my other knife builds. I wanted to see how well my sawblade machete would work to split down the log, so I gave it a try. Even though there are other tools more suitable for the job, you shouldn't let not having a particular tool keep you from starting a project. Anyway, I continued hacking away with the machete and trimming up the sides of the stock a bit further. I used a handsaw to cut a few pieces of stock into smaller chunks and then clean them up a bit with a chisel. To lay out the blade, I used a low-tech method of paper and marker. The shape is based off some pictures I'd looked at online, and since this was my first hook knife, I wasn't exactly sure what attributes I was going to need. I used a slip of paper to model the curve of the blade and figure out how long it needed to be. From there I sketched it out and erased it a few times before I came up with an outline that I was happy with. The rough cutting of the blade was done on the angle grinder with a cutoff wheel. The profile was fine-tuned a bit with the belt grinder. Cleaned up again with the cutoff wheel. And then given a final pass with the belt grinder. Here's how we did. I ground the bevel on the blade much the same way I did with my previous carving knives. I used the same 20-degree guide block I created on the table saw. The knife was taped down to the guide block and I simply worked my way up through the grits until I was happy with the bevel. I only ground a bevel on one side of the blade since the reference pictures I looked at only showed it on one side, and it kind of makes sense to me because using the hook knife is more of a gouging action, and I'm not sure how the inside of the knife would be sharpened anyway. By the way, you may have figured out by now that I'm left-handed, so if you're right-handed and you want to make yourself a knife, make sure you put the bevel on the right side. Once the bevel was completed, I just squared up the shoulders a bit with a file. Now the blade was ready to be bent. I used my makeshift forge setup again to heat the blade up so it could be bent. This forge is essentially a map gas torch with some junk piled on top of it to keep the heat in. The bending was done on my homemade anvil. I put a slight bend in the knife and continued to roll it forward a bit with my hammer. I ended up taking a few more heats before I ended up with a shape I was happy with. For tempering, I followed pretty much the same process as in my last video. I heated the blade up to a bright cherry red and then quenched it in some vegetable oil. It's a good idea to wipe off as much of the crud as possible, because after you temper the knife, it's going to form a coating that's a real pain to get off. Now let's pop it in the toaster oven. 400 degrees for 4 hours. I returned my attention to the handle, and the first step here was to drill the hole. I selected a drill bit that was slightly smaller than the widest part of the tang. You could use a lathe or other hand tools like a spoke shave here, but as you can see, this $3 chisel gets the job done. I had some copper tubing left over from a plumbing project, so I decided to use that for the ferrule. It's hard to see in the video, but I marked a circle over the hole to give me a guide as to where to take out the material. Then I methodically whittled away material, inspecting the progress as I went along. I also tapered down the ferrule end a bit. After a bit more shaping, I did some final cleanup work with a carving knife. Next I went ahead and made the ferrule. I guesstimated the length, marked it off, and then cut it with a standard tubing cutter. I hammered the ends of the ferrule a bit to give it a slightly belled shape. and also to add a bit of character and hopefully hold it in place a little better. By the way, this is probably my third attempt at trying to create this part. It took me a couple tries to get the length and shape exactly how I wanted them, but I think this is good to go. I was just about ready to start the final assembly, but the tang was a bit long, so I snipped off the end with an angle grinder. I did a test fit and got the nice snug fit I was looking for, so on to assembly. I mixed up a small batch of epoxy to glue everything together. I glued the ferrule in place, then gave it a few taps on the table to make sure it was set. After assembling the entire knife, I came back with a block of wood and a hammer and tapped it down even further. From here, I carved up some wedges to hold the blade in place. In theory, if you use wedges like this, you may not even need epoxy, but I wanted to make sure everything stayed in place, and I never plan on removing the blade anyway, so epoxy it is. I trimmed off the bulk of the material, and then wedged it in a bit further. Once the epoxy had some time to set, I did a bit more carving to clean everything up. I applied a coat of Danish oil and the knife was done. I couldn't wait to carve something, so I went ahead and carved up a spoon. While I was doing this carving, I kind of realized that the length of the blade was a little bit long for carving spoons, but the length might work out well for something that's deeper like a goblet or a cup. And there you have it. I gotta tell you, I'm really getting hooked on this hobby. Making these sawblade and firewood knives has definitely helped me sharpen my skills. It's also the first time I've taken a stab at making a knife with a ferrule. I like this approach because all I have to do is drill one hole and then fit in the blade. It's a fairly quick and easy process. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up or leave a comment. And as always, subscribe for more hacks and builds, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Cheers!